here with Country Diggers. Today I'm going to be doing the pirate series. I haven't been using my pirate stuff while doing my Pirates of the Florida Coast, and I just now thought about it. So I don't know what's wrong with me not using my pirate stuff. Okay. But anyway, we're going to go into the Pirates of the Florida Coast, Truths, Legends, and Myths by Robert Jacob. And we will be reading, let me get here. Okay, Chapter 8, Captain Robert Searle, Florida's First Pirate. Stay tuned. Chapter 8, Captain Robert Searle, Florida's First Pirate. The year was 1668, and the Spanish city of St. Augustine had remained unmolested for 82 years. The first attack on the city was led by Francis Drake, who successfully attacked St. Augustine in 1586. Drake was operating as a privateer in support of England's continued military and naval operations against the Spanish. However, the second attack of St. Augustine was led by a pirate. His name was Robert Searle. Some accounts say that Searle decided to attack St. Augustine in the spring of 1668 in retaliation of the Spanish attack on the English colony on New Providence in the Bahamas. This is doubtful because the Spanish attack on the colony occurred in 1664, 4 years earlier. A much more believable reason was greed. But who was Robert Searle, and what became of him? More importantly, as the first pirate to attack Florida, what were the circumstances surrounding that famous attack? All right, 1642 to 1651, the English Civil War resulted in the execution of Charles I in 1649 and temporarily ended the monarchy. England was governed by the Commonwealth under the personal rule of Oliver Cromwell as Lord Proctor from 1653 to 1658. All right, so far, no record of Robert Searle's life has been found, but it is very likely that he was either the brother or a close relative of Daniel Searle, who was the governor of Barbados in 1650s. During that time, Thomas Modiford also lived on Barbados and was a bitter political rival of Daniel Searle. This was the decade after the English Civil War, and the nation was very politically divided between those who supported the royal family living in exile and those who supported the parliamentary government under the rule of Oliver Cromwell. This political divide existed in the English colonies as well as in England. Modiford secretly supported the king, while Searle backed Cromwell and the parliamentary government called the Commonwealth. The restoration of King Charles II in 1660 obviously caused major political turmoil throughout England and the English colonies. Many political leaders who had been supporters of the parliamentary government were replaced with those who had remained loyal to the king. But over on Jamaica, things seemed to be going fairly smoothly. The buccaneers of Christopher Ming were too busy taking Spanish cities to worry about politics. One of their most profitable raids was the 1662 amphibious assault on the city of Santiago, Cuba. But far more significant to our story is that the detailed records of that raid mention the names of all Ming's captains. And Robert Searle enters the official record for the first time. Searle must have been with Ming's for some time before that, because he was given command of an 8-gun sloop, which Searle named the Caguay. Searle obviously named his sloop after the original name of Port Royal, which was called Caguay during parliamentary rule. That may have been a subtle way of showing his support for the defunct government. Another captain on that raid was Henry Morgan, who knew Robert Searle well. Shortly afterwards, Ming's was recalled to England, and Morgan took over as the buccaneer leader. Meanwhile, in 1664, King Charles II of England was attempting to patch up relations with Spain, and decided to discourage buccaneer raids against them in the Caribbean. He also realized that he needed to change the leadership of Jamaica to a governor who would support his orders. Thomas Molliford, who had remained loyal to the royal family, was brought over from Barbados and appointed governor of Jamaica. Shortly afterwards, King Charles II sent a letter to Molliford ordering him to end privateer attacks against the Spanish. 1664 to 1671, Sir Thomas Molliford was governor of Jamaica. Robert Searle always seemed to be in trouble with Governor Molliford. This is easily explained if Robert was indeed a relative of Daniel Searle, Molliford's old political foe from Barbados. In the summer of 1664, Searle became the first privateer to be officially reprimanded by the new governor for violating the recent policy of King Charles II. In the summer of that year, Searle was at sea, operating as a privateer with letters of marque from the old governor of Jamaica. He took 2 very rich Spanish prizes off Cuba and brought them to Port Royal. He planned to sell the cargo, divide the profits with his crew, and pay the English government their share in accordance with his commission. Most of the cargo had already been sold when King Charles II's letter ending attacks against the Spanish arrived at Jamaica. As Governor Molliford read the king's letter, he could glance towards the dock and see the sight of the 2 Spanish vessels being looted by Searle and his crew. It was instantly clear to Molliford that this would be the first test case, and Robert Searle had to be publicly dealt with. An emergency meeting of the Council of Jamaica was called, and the situation with Searle was debated. The decision of the council was that the governor of Cuba should be informed, and that the Spanish vessels and all the treasure and cargo should be immediately returned to the Spanish authorities. They also resolved to declare anyone a pirate who took Spanish prizes in the future, and to take Captain Searle's commission from him. Additionally, they confiscated his rudder, navigational charts, and all his sails. In one of his letters, Molliford wrote, "On reading the king's letter of June 15th last, commanding restitution of captured ships and goods to the Spaniards, ordered that the ship and bark brought in by Captain Searle of the Port Royal be seized and restored to that nation, and also all spice that can be found. That notice, therefore, be sent to the governor of Havana. that persons making any further attempts of violence and depredation upon the Spaniard be looked upon as pirates and rebels, and that Captain Searle's commission be taken from him, and his rudder and sails taken ashore for security. After that incident, Robert Searle often went by the name of John Davis. Perhaps he used that alias to hide his identity while he continued taking Spanish ships. Okay, March 4th, 1665 to July 31st, 1667 was the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Searle's status changed rapidly in 1666 as the war between England and the Dutch Republic was intensified. Governor Molliford needed as many privateers as he could get. Additionally, tension was with the Spanish was increasing, so issuing letters of marque against the Spanish was now allowed. Robert Searle's ship, rudder, navigational charts, and sails were returned to him, and he joined an expedition under the command of Colonel Edward Morgan, the new lieutenant governor of Jamaica, and the uncle and father-in-law of Henry Morgan. Morgan had married his first cousin. With a force of 9 vessels and 650 men, they sailed from Port Royal in March or April of 1666 to attack the Dutch islands of St. Eustace and Saba. Unfortunately, during the attack, Edward Morgan died of heat stroke, and the entire command split up. Searle formed a partnership with Captain Stedman, one of the other captains, and they sailed away. A year later, in the spring of 1667, Searle and Stedman, in their 2 vessels with a force of about 80 men, attacked the Dutch island close to Trinidad. They were successful and completely sacked the entire island. May of 1668, Searle was on his ship, the Caguay, cruising off the coast of Cuba near the Florida Straits, with letters of marque from Governor Molliford, allowing him to attack Spanish shipping. He had another vessel with him. Perhaps it was his partner Stedman, but this is only speculation. The 2 privateers spotted 2 Spanish vessels, a ship bound for Veracruz and a brigantine bound for Havana. The Spanish vessels were easily taken, and Searle decided to keep them to add to his fleet. Aboard the Spanish brigantine, Searle questioned a passenger who was a former French surgeon named Pedro Pips. He told Searle about a vessel carrying a shipment of silver bars that had recently sunk near St. Augustine. He continued his tale by adding that all the bars had been recovered and that they were being kept in the treasury of the fort. This sounded almost too good to be true. So with his fleet of 4 vessels, Searle sailed north to the only large city in Florida. May 29, 1668, Robert Searle sacked St. Augustine, Florida. On the morning of May 28, 1668, Searle's fleet arrived at St. Augustine. He kept his 2 well-armed and English-built vessels out of sight, as they would be easily recognized as privateers as soon as they neared the town. Then he sent a portion of his pirates towards the harbor, aboard the 2 recently captured Spanish vessels. Searle believed that the town officials would not be alarmed at the sight of 2 innocent-looking Spanish merchant vessels coming into port. The plan was working, and the Spanish soldiers manning the guns of the fort were not concerned, as Spanish merchant vessels entered the port all the time. The two vessels dropped anchor and waited for night. The harbor pilot rowed out to greet them and was told by one of the Spanish-speaking buccaneers that they were merchants from Mexico. The pilot returned to shore, reassured that they were legitimate Spanish merchants. No one in the town or at the fort was suspicious. Just after midnight on May 29, 1668, the other two vessels silently sailed past the fort's guns and quietly slipped into the harbor. However, they were spotted by Corporal Miguel de Monzon, who happened to be out in the harbor fishing. Realizing they were English privateers, Monzon frantically rowed ashore under fire from Searle's men. Wounded twice, he managed to make it to shore and alerted the Spanish authorities, but he was too late. As he shouted the alarm, Searle's buccaneers swarmed ashore and ran through the streets looting everything. Anyone who resisted was shot. Some made it to the fort for protection, including Governor Francisco de la Guerra de la Vega, while others escaped into the surrounding forest. The Spanish soldiers in the fort did nothing to stop the pirates. In fact, some of them even fled into the forest. It was over very quickly. About 60 Spanish townfolks were killed and about 70 were taken prisoner, nearly half the entire population. Searle then turned his attack towards the fort, but after a half-hearted attempt to capture it, decided it wasn't worth the risk. In the morning, he exchanged his prisoners for firewood and provisions. Then he burned the city to the ground and sailed away. The buccaneers only lost 11 men and another 19 injured. The loot amounted to 133 silver marks, 760 yards of canvas for sails, 25 pounds of candles, and untold amounts of valuable jewelry and other personal items that they took while ransacking the city. They also rescued Henry Woodward, an English surgeon who was living in the town after being captured by the Spanish several months earlier. It is believed that after his rescue, Woodward served as a surgeon aboard several privateer vessels and eventually settled in Charlestown, South Carolina. The mark is not a coin, but an accounting value. 1 mark is equal to 2/3 of the pound in weight. 133 silver marks equals approximately 89 pounds of silver. Searle had letters of marque giving him permission to attack Spanish shipping, but he clearly exceeded his authority when he took a Spanish port. That violation changed his status from privateer to pirate. Fearing that Governor Molliford would again be upset with his actions, Searle decided to quietly return to Jamaica and put in at Port Morant, which was just outside of the governor's legal jurisdiction, until he could be sure of the governor's disposition. It was a good call because Governor Molliford became furious when he learned of Searle's sacking of St. Augustine. Eventually, Governor Molliford was informed of his arrival, and on March 18, 1670, he wrote, "There arrived also at Port Morant the Caguay, Captain Searle, with 70 stout men, who, hearing that I was much incensed against him for that action of St. Augustine, went to Macquarie Bay, and there rides out my command." I will use the best ways to apprehend him without driving his men to despair. When Searle finally came ashore within jurisdiction of the governor, he was arrested. Governor Molliford wrote the English authorities stating that Searle was still in the custody of Jamaica's provost marshal awaiting trial, and asked them what they wanted done with Searle and his men. After several months without answer, Searle was released and his vessel, the Caguay, was returned to him. It seems that the governor needed Searle and his men to assist in one of the greatest privateer ventures of all time. Henry Morgan was planning to take the immensely wealthy city of Panama. It was the summer of 1670, and the Treaty of Madrid had just been signed, which ended hostilities between England and Spain. Even though the news of the treaty reached Port Royal before Morgan left, Governor Molliford and Morgan didn't take the news seriously and decided to go ahead with their plan to take the city of Panama anyway. Morgan obtained his letters of marque from Molliford and left Port Royal, accompanied by his old comrade Robert Searle. Morgan had assembled the largest buccaneer fleet in history. He began his careful amphibious operation, landing on the Isthmus of Panama on December 27, 1670. Moving up the Charges River and crossing to the Pacific side, Morgan led a well-organized attack of 6 ranks of infantry with both flanks supported by 200 cavalry. As Morgan's main force of buccaneers opened fire, the Spanish suffered heavy casualties and the rest of the troops routed. Panama City fell, and Morgan had taken an estimated 400,000 pieces of 8. After Panama was captured, Morgan gave the vitally important task of securing the port to his old comrade Robert Searle. He was ordered to capture any vessels attempting to leave the port. Upon reaching the shore, Searle's men found a Spanish bark, the Fasca, which had been intentionally grounded and set on fire during the attack to prevent the English from capturing it. But Searle's men managed to put out the fire and refloat the vessel. In a few days, Searle managed to capture 3 other Spanish vessels. With his small flotilla, Searle cruised the offshore islands of Perico, Tobogela, and Otaqua, where they took many prisoners and a lot of valuable property. Unfortunately, that included a large amount of Peruvian wine, and by evening, all Searle's men were drunk. Too drunk to notice the large Spanish galleon approaching the port. It was the Santissima Trinidad, heavily laden with gold, silver, pearls, jewels, and other most valuable goods. The galleon had been in port when Morgan attacked Panama and was ordered to flee to another port. But the captain decided to simply put to sea and return to Panama after he felt the English privateers had left. The captain of the Spanish galleon, Don Francisco de Peralta, saw Searle's bark, but assumed it was just another Spanish vessel that had escaped the attack of the city. The galleon anchored nearby, and a small party of 7 men was sent ashore in a rowboat to get fresh water. Some of Searle's men accidentally ran into the Spanish shore party, captured them and brought them to Searle. Under threat of torture, the prisoners told Searle of the nearby location of their galleon. Additionally, they told Searle that the galleon was armed with only 7 guns and about a dozen muskets. Realizing that this incredibly rich prize was theirs for the taking, Searle quickly ordered his men to set sail, but they were all too drunk to respond, so Searle decided to wait for morning. However, during the night, Peralta became suspicious when his men didn't return, so he set sail and escaped in the darkness. When Morgan learned that Searle had let this rich prize slip through his fingers, he was outraged. Searle was bitterly reprimanded, and Morgan never trusted him again. After returning from Panama, Searle left Morgan's company and began operating in the Gulf of Campeche. Several years later, according to William Dampier, he was killed in a duel with one of his men on a tiny island at the northern end of the Gulf, still known as Searle's Key. All right, hope y'all enjoyed, and next time will be Chapter 9, Buccaneers Become Pirates.